I mean, if you're listening right now, you're probably thinking, oh, wait, what temperature have I lived at my whole life? Like, do you even know? Like, do you remember what temperature you grew up in versus what you do now?
Bringing you a reasoned approach to health and fitness. This is the Phi Life Podcast.
Welcome to the Phi Life Podcast. I'm John Barbin. With me is Brad Pilon, and we're brought to you today by the Total T Clinic. And today we're going to talk about your environment and heat and cold as it relates to your metabolism. And eventually we'll get into how that relates to your ability to regulate weight, lose weight, and gain weight, whether or not you want to. It's going to happen anyways, depending on your environment and if you're actively working with or against your environment. I mean, I guess that's a simple way to start it. So I'm going to hand it off to Brad to start us on this little talk here. And hopefully it gets, by the end of this, we want you to understand you and you're not independent of your environment.
No.
So we've heard about North America being an obesogenic environment. What does that even mean? Does that just mean, access to palatable foods, food advertising? We sit in our house in the morning, we sit in our car to drive to work, if you still even commute. Then you usually, if you don't have a job that requires you to move, you sit at work, then you sit again in your car, and then you sit again at home. So that's one form of an obesogen environment. And that's maybe the obvious one. We think about that, plus abundance of food.
The old move more, eat less concept, right? And then it's the environment, the availability and the convenience driving you away from those things. But we're going to argue it's way, way more than that.
Right. Yeah. And one of the major things is the atmosphere you're living in.
Yep.
And actually the lack of difference in the atmosphere, or the lack of forcing you to adapt to your atmosphere.
Yeah. And, by the end of this, you might be questioning your cold plunges and stuff like that, but we'll kind of get into it. So you kind of ponder things, right? And you kind of wonder, man, humans did a simply fantastic job of spreading all over the planet. We're like literally every square mile of this planet we've probably been on, except for under the oceans and that kind of stuff. So it speaks to our just amazing adaptability. But we are tropical by nature, right? So in the grand scheme of the time we've been, or our ancestors have been on this planet, we've been tropical. And interestingly, we're a furless tropical being, right? So we're used to heat, and we're used to having to deal with heat, because as endotherms, as we regulate our heat with our environment. Temperature is our biggest threat. If you think of, let's say, famine, right, and starvation. So our great ancestors didn't have a lot of availability of food. Thanks to body fat and a few other things, we can go at the very least weeks, if not months, without food. But get caught outside, and and I'm gonna give you Celsius a lot. Being Canadian, we kind of use a bit of both. But you get caught in -20 weather, whatever that is in Fahrenheit, and if you're not clothed properly, you've got minutes to hours before death, right? So, and along the same lines, scorching. Heat's not quite as bad, but it's still bad, right? So we are most vulnerable, other than predators, to temperature, right? So it begs the question, how did we adapt? What are the big adaptations that we went through to allow us to spread? And then was it just behavior, right? So was it just God, it's really hot out, I should find some shade? Or was it, wow, it's really, really cold out, I should learn how to harness the power of fire? But it turns out it's more than that. It turns out that, and as John and I are going to discuss, your brain, which is smarter than you and is more simply than just you and what you think, is incredibly, incredibly good at reading the inputs from your environment and adapting not only your behavior, but your physiology to try to make sure you can thrive and survive in that atmosphere. this gets really interesting because in reading this research, I thought, yeah, but man, I know from research that the average person, especially in North America, spends upwards of 95% of their day inside, right? Like as John was pointing out, we get up from our house, we get dressed, we probably get into a car to go to an office, to get in a car to come back home. And yeah, you might mow your lawn or do some gardening for half hour. But in general, the general population, we're talking at least 95% of the time indoors. So what does this whole environment thing really matter? And it turns out it matters a lot. So, and John, you and I were just talking about this. Like, what do you think you probably keep your house at as a temperature?
It's parked around 68-ish all the time.
Yeah, and see, that's what mine used to be too. Just something down around there. 68. So again, Celsius and Fahrenheit.
Here we go. 68 Fahrenheit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Celsius
20, 19, 20.
Nah, not even like 18.
Yeah. We need like a calculator right in front of us.
Yeah.
Okay. So the interesting thing is for a non-clothed person, thermal neutral, the temperature in which you feel comfortable and which your metabolism doesn't have to do anything to regulate your internal temperature, we're looking at like 26 or 27 degrees Celsius. And again, I have no idea what that is Fahrenheit. We're going to have to...
That's a lot.
Warm. It's warm. It's almost summer temperature.
You're pushing 80 there. You're pushing 80 degrees there. I think,
and then
I remember I remember thinking, I saw it once, 28 Celsius is 82 Fahrenheit, I think. So like it's just the two numbers flipped. So I always remember that. That's a simple way to know like how much those two are.
Oh, 28 to 82. Okay, yeah. So we're talking like 78, right? Sort of thing. That's when a nude human would be comfortable. So we live in homes and offices that are they're artificial winter. It kind of feels like summer because we're wearing our sweaters and we wear pants to work, most of us, right? But in reality, it's cold. For a human being, that's a cold temperature. Not only is it cold, it's dim. The brightest office is still far, far less light than even an overcast day outside. So we have the inputs of winter all year long, all day long, right? Internally, and I don't think we've talked about this in this podcast, but we will eventually. CO2 or carbon dioxide levels build up really high in internal, really enclosed buildings. So your office, a school, a lot of times your home. CO2 is often highest outside during winter, right? Or even in colder areas. So just every possible input you could give your body to say, hey, it's winter, without it actually being winter, is available to you indoors constantly.
Yeah, and this is your car, this is your office, this is your house. It doesn't matter if you live in a warm climate that's warm all year round. It seems as though we're going to regulate our environment everywhere we are indoors to something colder than 78-ish or whatever.
Yeah, and we'll get into why that is because there's a brain trick there too.
Yeah, we regulate down to Brad's point. So we're simulating something approximating winter or colder than how we're evolved to handle. We're pushing it lower on a consistent basis on a daily basis.
So then we wonder, does this matter, right? Well, now we do know in general, again, we're talking population wide. So I'm not taking a shot at you or your friend or anything, but people who live in warmer climates tend to be smaller, weigh less, and be leaner than people who live in colder climates. As a population, because I know right now you're thinking, I've got a friend who lives in Texas and he's really big. But no, just as a group, as a population, the people who live in warmer climates, traditionally kind of pre-air conditioning, have been leaner and smaller than people who live in the colder climates. But again, does that really matter since we're all inside? Turns out in populations sort of north of 40 latitude. So anything in the States, what's that, like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh and above, anyone who experiences summer and winter. It's like a warm, go to the beach summer and I'm never leaving my house, it's so bloody cold winter. That kind of dichotomy cycle in their weight. You're slightly heavier, slightly fatter in winters, slightly leaner, slightly less weighing, less heavy in the summers. pretty cool. But then there's research out of England, and they followed people for 13 years of this cycle. But what they paid attention to was people who were older, generally, again, as a population, tend to go outside a little bit less. And they followed what their thermostats were set at. So, those new fancy like Nest thermostats, not quite that fancy, but something like that, where the thermostat was sending readings back to a lab all year long. And what they found was the people who kept their house at 23 Celsius, so 73.5 Fahrenheit, generally had lower BMIs. Again, BMI, I know people are like, oh, it's crap, but it's great for population research. Their BMIs were lower than the people who kept their house at around 1966 degrees Fahrenheit, 19 Celsius, or lower. So even in a population living together in England, the ones that kept their houses warmer tend to be a little bit leaner, the ones that kept their houses cooler. But then as a group, we know that, man, we're all a little bit leaner during the summer, a little bit heavier during the winter. And then as a globe, we know that the people who generally pre-AC live closer to warmer climates tended to be leaner than the rest of us, or people like me who live up in the north where it's cold. So why? Right? And that's what John and I, we've been really digging into is what's going on. And it turns out like everything is going on. It is amazing how your body reacts to inputs and how a lot of those reactions are similar to what we would see with exercise, fasting, saunaing, dieting. All these things have similar reactions. So what would be hormone people get? Growth hormone. All right. Growth hormone is pretty popular. We all know that intense exercise boosts growth hormone. We know that fasting boosts growth hormone. But heat also boosts growth hormone. Even just the heat of the cyclical seasons, summer, your growth hormone is higher than winter. But if you exercise in the cold, no growth hormone, right? So your body's reading the inputs of temperature and being like, okay, we're going to adapt your hormones so you can react best to this temperature. So you might be wondering, well, why growth hormone? Well, from Eat Stop Eat and all the work that we've done, we know that growth hormone is a major player in fat loss. When your growth hormone is high, your insulin is low, you release fat from your fat stores. So why would you put growth hormone down when you're cold? Well, what's the number one thing that we need when we're cold? If we can't grab a sweater, we're hoping we have internal insulation, and fat is a phenomenal insulator. So John, we've called this sort of a hot metabolism and a cold metabolism, right?
Yeah.
A cold metabolism is something that is when your body, through inputs, aligns you with the idea of you need to gain fat. So what are the things it's going to do? Drive you to eat more and set up your hormones and enzymes so that what you eat is preferentially stored as body fat.
Yeah. And so this brings up the concept of the obesogenic environment, which I didn't really think about till we started reading about this heat stuff. I was like, oh yeah, I guess part of that is just the ambient temperature. You're kind of
actual environment, right?
The actual environment. So if you're thermo neutral all day long, so if you're parked at the same temperature all day long, so you're not challenging your body with higher temperatures or lower temperatures. And as Brad said, we all tend to seem to put it a little bit colder. You're setting yourself up to kind of want to eat a little bit more, but you're utterly unaware of this. You don't know that
you don't know why.
Potentially your appetite's just a bit more stimulated. It's not like you're ravenously hungry. I mean, if you're listening right now, you're probably thinking, oh, wait, what temperature have I lived at my whole life? Like, do you even know? Like, do you remember what temperature you grew up in versus what
That's the other thing. Yeah. What do your parents keep it at?
Yeah. What temperature you're forced to live in wherever you work,
office.
Or places where you don't have an option. It's not for you to go up and just switch the temperature. So that has been influencing your appetite to some degree and your body's propensity to want to lay down or not lay down a bit of fat your whole life. And then again, to Brad's point, where you live in the world, do you go through a hot summer, cold winter phase or not? Do you even leverage any of that by going outside at all? Or do you just park it inside? Again, thermo neutral all the time, like same temperature all the time. So are you are you eliminating your body's ability to adapt to changes in temperature by just not exposing yourself to them? Or is your environment limiting that for you? Are you aiding it? After reading about this, I thought, my gym is freezing cold. Like
Yes,
when I go
great
to the
example.
gym, it's so, I kind of knew it was cold, but didn't think about it. But when we started reading about this, I'm like, oh, geez, yeah, the gym keeps it like super cold all the time.
I've got one for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Restaurants. Know this research. A higher end restaurant will be chilly. You'll order more.
Yeah. So this is going on whether or not you're aware. Hopefully now that you're listening, you're becoming aware as we're talking. It sort of didn't occur to me. Well, Brad did this research and then got me to start reading along with them. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, I see. Like this totally makes sense. It's kind of obvious now when you think about it. Like it seems, I mean, you do have to do the evolutionary research to work back from there and realize this kind of makes sense. You know, we're a tropical species. We weren't, if left to no technology, you're not going to last too long in the cold. Like you have to adapt really fast. Otherwise you're toast, but you could last a lot longer living in a warm climate and finding some shade versus the closer you get to the poles, the less chance you have of surviving. But if you live right at the equator, you can find your way around the day with some shade. Assuming
some shade and water, you're good.
Right.
Yeah.
Shade and water, you could survive at the equator with zero modern technology. You can't survive towards the poles. Like the colder it gets, you need something. You
get a really good fire. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
Well, you would have had to have adapted and be smarter with your adaptation a lot sooner and incorporate wearing animal skins. Like you have to do something to stay warm.
Yeah.
Like, especially when you know the winter's coming. Like, well, we lost half the people last winter. We got to make it through the next winter. If the cold is that acute, to Brad's point, if it's cold enough, you're only going to make it a few minutes. If it's really, really, really hot, now save from being stuck in a desert with absolutely no shade and no water. I mean, that's going to be a dehydration situation.
Yeah, extremes in any direction are, yeah.
Right. But just generally living in a hot climate versus a cold climate, you're going to last a lot longer. And we are adapted to handle a hot climate way more than a cold climate.
Yeah. Now you raise a great point, which is, generations in each area is we do adapt. So the human shape, our geometry, seems to be adapted for temperature as well. You look at surface area and the ability to hold in the heat you generate. Because remember, when we talk about your metabolism and the generation of heat, 77% of the energy you produce is heat. It's to maintain an internal body temperature that every single chemical reaction that makes you living requires. So you are constantly creating heat inside of you. And the two things you can do is make sure you can release that heat if you're getting too hot, or hold on to that heat in areas that are cold. Populations who've lived in cold climates tend to be more spherical, shaped like a ball, than people who live in warmer climates, who tend to be tall, lean, long-limbed. And that has a lot to do with their ability to release heat, or more importantly, hold on to that heat when they're cold. So body fat, especially fat around the important stuff like internal organs, because your organs generate a lot of heat. At rest, that's what generates a lot of your heat. When you're exercising, it's your muscles. They're awesome. But when you're not moving around, they don't do much. It's everything else. So that visceral fat that's so bad for you is also pretty important when it's cold out. So those can be suggested to be adaptations to living in different climates, right? So it's not just appetite, and it's not just your body fat, but long term, it can actually end up being the shape of a population of people. So,
so think of the implications. Does anyone even think of what temperature research on weight loss is done? Like what temperature the subjects? Like,
hey, where was the research done?
Yeah. What region? Is it a warm region of the country? Is it a colder? Is it the summer or the winter? How long were the subjects in the study? What temperature was the lab? Do you even know what temperature those people live at when they leave the lab?
It gets even farther than that. There's research controversy Big controversy in the research world. They're coming to blows, not really, but it turns out mice, specifically laboratory mice and laboratory rats, are more like a naked human. They like it hot. But labs, because people work in them, are kept in that sort of 20-degree range, much colder than they would be in the wild or in their natural habitat. Is that affecting the research? Is that driving them towards eating more? Is that driving their physiology towards fat gain? Now we have to ask that question. We've been wondering for a couple of decades why our pets are also getting fatter, right? That was like the whole, maybe it's a virus passing around or something, but it could also be that these animals, like your cats, are also like desert animals, I believe. They're tropical as well. So if you're like this guy and have really obese house cats, it might not be because you're feeding them too much. It might be because they're eating more because they're hungry, because they're in a colder climate than they're used to. So it is massive. And to give you an idea of this whole thing, even just sticking with GH, John, you'll love this. So kids who have idiopathic short stature, so they're short and we don't know why, right? We give them growth hormone to help them grow, because for children, not adults, unfortunately, but for children, growth hormone does help you grow linearly. That works better in the summer.
That's wild.
Yeah, wild.
Yeah.
A kid in puberty, 60 to 70% of their growth in a year, summer months.
Oh,
Right?
Really?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So it's all sort of based around this. In fact, research looking at, I believe it was Neanderthals, because they were one of the first to kind of travel into the cold. Looking at their bones, they actually found periods of complete arrest of growth and healing. And they think it's because of cold exposure. So the growth hormone was probably so low that the bones were actually having problems. Sort of bone turns over, kind of like your muscles, right? Calcium comes in, calcium goes out, that kind of thing. So that it's so dependent on temperature, they could actually shut down growth, or vice versa, if the temperature is right, enhance growth. And that's just GH. I think you and I talked about this one decades ago. That's how old we are. But oral glucose tolerance tests. So remember, you take that like 100 grams of sugar in a drink.
75 or something.
75, you pound it back and they measure blood glucose. So they figured out now that those results are temperature dependent. So if you did them in winter and I did them in summer at the same lab, but maybe they had the AC blasting versus the heat blasting at different temperatures, different results.
And your hydration status will also change that too.
Yep.
Yeah. I remember we were running an OGG test when I was in my master's, and a couple of buddies were on. So we didn't have enough. So everyone had an IV drip going too, and to keep them hydrated. We didn't have enough of those like poles that holds up your bag of your IV. So two people were on at the same time. Yeah. And one of our buddies, he was like, he's like, man, I'm really cold. I'm like, I don't know. Like, is it cold in here? It didn't seem like it. Yeah. And then, so I got the nurse to come over that was like working, because obviously I can't put an IV in. I'm not licensed. So, and I'm like, hey, he's pretty cold. What's going on here? And apparently he was just burning through, like his bag drip was going way too fast. Oh, wow. So he was, so I guess he was, I guess, taking on too much fluid, and that was cooling him off way faster than the person that was on the other side of the pole. And he's like wondering what's wrong with this guy. So, but that was just a neat little like moment where it seemed like right in front of me is like, oh, here's like a tiny little experiment. Like one person's getting way colder here. And it's because he's just taking way more fluids on like directly into his system. And it was just obvious that was changing how he perceived the temperature in the room at the moment.
Interesting. So they did research. Remember the old buffet style research? So you do an intervention, and then when you were done, you tell people, hey, like, good job. In that room over there is just a bunch of food. Grab what you want, and then we'll talk to you about the results later. And then you secretly measured the amount of food they ate, right? Yeah. Okay. So they did a swimming protocol, and people had to swim, and then they either had the pool at a colder temperature or more of a thermal neutral temperature. The people who swam in the colder water, 44%, they ate 44% more than when they swam in the neutral water. Oh yeah, I believe that. That's insane. And then even walking, they had people walk on like treadmills, And the people who walked in the cooler temperature, like 11% more. So not massive, but the point is the subjects, when you asked them, hey, how hungry are you? No difference in their answer. So again, to your point, it's not like they're like, oh, I'm ravenous because it's cold, so I'm going to eat more. They had no clue.
And that's the key. That's the key point. What that they didn't perceive it. That's the whole point of your environment is having an effect on you that you're utterly unaware of. So the only way to notice this is this kind of population level research, even though to Brad's point, like, well, how does that apply to me directly? And, I'm not a population, I'm one person, but it does lend some insights into trends, like things that are correlated together. So if you do tend to eat more a little bit in the winter, or a population tends to seem to go up in body weight in the winter, or living in colder climate, like all of these lines of evidence keep directing us to the same conclusion. It's reasonable that there's an actual effect there.
And we then, because of that, we look at mechanism now, right?
Yeah,
and
what's the mechanism?
You name a popular hormone, it's affected by heat. Leptin. Mm-hmm. Higher in summer, lower in winter, higher in the heat, lower in the cold. Leptin is a main driver. It's a way your body supposedly measures the amount of body fat you have and then decides what the right amount is and drives your hunger up or down. Ghrelin, same thing, but kind of opposite, right? So ghrelin goes up in cold temperatures, down in hot temperatures. Like you can literally pick a hormone or an enzyme that you've read about or took a supplement to affect, and temperature affects it. Right? So we have these populational studies like John was talking about, but then we've dug down into mechanism. So if you've ever exercised thinking, man, I should do some high intensity exercise to boost my growth hormone, then the concept has to be sound that temperature matters, because you've done other things to affect that same process. If you've ever wondered about leptin and maybe you've carb loaded once, right? Temperature has the same effect. And in fact, with John, you've recently started experimenting with the sauna after we talked about this, because temperature can either enhance or blunt those same hormonal effects that you're getting from your exercise. So I talked about earlier, if you were to do intense exercise out in the cold, you wouldn't get that GH response, which means you wouldn't get that increased fat burning response. Preheating before exercise increases the muscle response in terms of muscle growth and strength during the exercise. In fact, John, you and I were talking about the literal term warm up, right? Like,
yeah, you literally warm the body up. So, and I've only ever thought about, now I think about it after doing this research in terms of maximizing your metabolic response. So the potential fat burning response linked with the muscle building response. And then at the mechanistic level, the hormones, maximizing the hormone response to get you into that state, that fat burning and muscle building state. But the idea of warming up, I always thought of, well, it was just understood you warm a muscle up because it's got a less chance of injury when it's warm. Yeah. It's literally becomes more elastic, more flexible, and it can handle the exertion you're going to put against it better. It's kind of like warming up putty or Play-Doh before you stretch it. If it's cold and you just stretch it, it just rips right in half. But if you warm it up, then you pull and it starts like stretching. It's crude, but that's kind of how I picture a warm up with muscle. It's kind of how that works. But now it's also, you've got to literally the temperature of your body goes up. Your core internal temperature goes up from doing a warm up exercise. Not only do the tissues get a little bit more malleable, a little stretchier, so they're flexible, more stretchy, ready for the workout, but you're priming your hormonal system to actually respond the way you want to respond to the workout, meaning you're likely going to push yourself to more fat burning and better muscle growth when you approach your workout warm. Stay warm throughout the workout and then stay warm after the workout.
So the argument there is that the heat generated, and the heat is impressive. Like your muscles create a lot of heat when they're moving. That your body reads that input of that heat, and that's a large part of your response to exercise. So if I were to do something dumb, like let's say the gym was 20 minutes away and I'm like, I'm just going to walk there in a t-shirt because I don't want to wear a jacket. I get there and I immediately start working out. Whereas John gets there, he wore a jacket, he's not cold from the outside, then he warms up properly, then he starts his workout. I'm starting at a 0. John's starting at a 3 or 4. And we're both trying to get to 8 or 9. Right. So not only am I starting at a higher risk of injury, but just in terms of that generation of heat, I'm behind the ball already. So John's getting more out of his workout and I'm just catching up to him while at the same time at a higher risk of injury. So a warm up is fantastically important. And it's something that we all just ignore as kind of like circle your arm a couple of times. You're like, I'm good. Let's go. Right. So
yeah.
But you want to get the muscles actually warmed up. And this isn't like a minor thing. This is avoiding catastrophic bicep tears type of thing. And then the actual strength improvements, you're looking at a measurable increase in protein synthesis versus a blunted protein synthesis. So we're talking about actual compounded over the weeks and months of working out. These can be significant differences in how effective a workout is simply by the temperature in which you did it.
And a measurable response in growth hormone and some of the other hormones that are going to lead to fat burning and muscle gaining. So you have to do the micro look and then the macro look. All of those things at that one individual workout. Yes, you're not going to walk out of the gym like your waist is going to be significantly visibly smaller and your muscles got significantly bigger by the end of that day. But being set up for that, each workout builds on the last workout. All the progress builds on the progress before. And months and a year later, you're further down the muscle gain, fat loss road than you would have been if you didn't put yourself in these positions workout after workout after workout.
Yeah. And then the other thing we talked about is we're not saying someone who lives, 4 hours north of Toronto in Canada can't get in shape, can't get in amazing fitness ready, step on stage. You can live in Sault Ste. Marie and still be in fantastic shape. We're just saying that your adaptation to temperature can make that easier or harder. And one of the interesting things we've been talking about is the fact that just like you can acclimate to heat, right? So if we went on vacation for a couple of weeks down in the Caribbean and the place we rented didn't have AC, after about 4 or 5 days, you wouldn't notice. The first 4 or 5 days, it would suck, but then you would get used to that heat. Your body acclimates to it. The suggestion here is you also acclimate to being overweight. So if I am carrying, 30, 40 pounds more than I should, thus that's insulation, that I'm extra insulation I'm carrying, I'm going to want my house like a degree cooler. I'm going to want the AC in my car just a bit higher. But then that's, again, driving that drive for just a bit more fat. So you almost snowball, or at the very least, make it very difficult and uncomfortable to lose. So let's get into what this means in a minute. But one of the main things I want to question with this is, and John, you and I have been stuck on this for a long time. Fast metabolism, slow metabolism is just an idea of the rate of metabolism. It doesn't say anything towards what's happening. Whereas, and it doesn't necessarily, a very overweight person will have a higher metabolic rate than a lean person. A sick person has a higher metabolic rate than a healthy person. The person with a fever has a higher metabolic rate. Yeah. A high metabolic rate doesn't always mean healthy, and it doesn't mean fat loss. But if we think hot metabolism, cold metabolism, and that what is your body trying to accomplish long-term, a hot metabolism is trying to drive you towards eating a little bit less so you lose a little bit of body fat so that you can maintain a thermal neutrality that your body is comfortable at. Vice versa, a cold, your body's just optimizing. So a cold metabolism is just trying to make sure that you have the right amount of body fat needed to thrive and survive. So what this really opened my eyes to was the concept is whatever body fat you're carrying, outside of a true disease state, is just the amount that your brain thinks is optimal for you, given your environment. So to make losing weight easier, you also have to slightly adjust that environment.
Right. And that's the key. It's a lever you can pull. Yes. So you might as well. And you said something, there's a comfort to this. If you're constantly living in comfort, let's just leave it at let's expand it to exercise. Like exercise is uncomfortable. Yeah. Like I'd much rather be.
You get hot and sweaty.
Yeah. And if you're and there's some amount of direct discomfort at the muscle level.
Yep.
Depending how hard you're pushing, especially with resistance training, you get that burn. That's uncomfortable. Like most people who haven't felt that, or the first time you ever felt it, you're like, oh, is that right? That almost feels like something's wrong. Like if you've never felt your muscles burn before, like especially at the end of like a set, you really, really push it. That definitely seems like you did something wrong. Like that's probably damage, or like if that was happening all
going
day
for a
long,
run for the first time,
oh, it's terrible. Yeah,
you're gonna die.
Everything's wrong. The delayed onset muscle soreness after a workout, also seems wrong, even though those are all short-term adaptations that lead to long-term changes. And those are all situations that are very obvious. You intervened to force your body out of its comfort zone during the workout and even post-workout while you're dealing with the muscle soreness. These are all things where you actively intervened in your environment, created a change. It always starts with something uncomfortable, but on the other end, your muscles get a little bit bigger or you burn a little bit of fat. But you had to go through the uncomfortable change to get to the other side. So the obvious things we think about are stuff like, oh, I ate less. It was kind of lousy because I wanted to eat more, but I ate a bit less today. Kind of went to bed like, I was a little peckish. I still could have eaten something. But again, that's an uncomfortable perturbation to your body. And by tomorrow, you would have burned a little bit more fat than if you had that final snack at the end of the day. But again, uncomfortable, always pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. Your body's just adapting to whatever you're doing to it anyways. Doesn't
always constantly adapting to the inputs. Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if the inputs are conscious. So just living somewhere cold, you're just adapted to that. And then if you spend some time in the heat, your body's just going to adapt to it anyways.
The amount of sunlight hitting your eyes, your body adapts to that.
Sunlight, whether how awake you feel has to do with how quickly and how often you get into the sun, or not even the sun, just the light intensity outside versus the limited light intensity you can generate inside.
Yep.
So I like Brad's concept of a hot or cold metabolism instead of fast or slow. Your body's adapting to whatever you're immersed in and whatever you're doing. Since we do have modern technology, we live most of our lives indoors and we can control the temperature indoor. That we have to start thinking about as a lever we can pull in our favor.
Yes.
So do you want to slowly increase your living temperature by a few degrees over time, as weeks or months, to the point where, again, it's going to be
1 or 2 degrees Celsius from 20 to 22. So I'll do the math quick on what that is for you Fahrenheit folks. But we're not talking living in a sauna.
No, it's not a lot. It's not a lot. Maybe if I've got my place at 68, over about a month or two, I work my way up to 73, 74.
73, 72, 73.
But along the way, it's going to be uncomfortable. It's not going to be uncomfortable forever, but it's going to be uncomfortable along the way as you force the adaptation. And that's your body telling you, but I'm adapted to 68. I don't like 72.
God, now I got to lose this stuff to make this thing more comfortable. Yeah.
Because it's like we lay down enough fat, and given how often you're outside and how cold your living environment is, we kind of like it like where we like.
We've had 40 plus years of this temperature being comfortable, right?
So and I'm talking we as in you and your body are a group of two. So it's the we.
Pretty much.
And that's because a lot of things that are going on in your body are not your conscious control. Your body's just adapting to the environment you've placed in front of it. So as soon as you consciously intervene, like with exercise, with your diet, another simple thing, just don't have blue lights on your screens towards the end of the night. That helps you get into sleep quicker. So our environment changed so quickly from an evolutionary standpoint. It changed so quickly. We had no ability to genetically actually adapt to it. So now
AC is incredidly new, right? Like that's AC a really new one.
Yeah, AC is super new. Like I'm in San Diego, half the people here don't even have AC.
Yeah.
Like it's just,
whereas I live off of AC and internal heat in Canada. We only have two options, right? Like it's your AC's on or your heat's on.
Yeah. And you're living in a more extreme heat in the summer and more extreme cold and longer cold in the winter. Whereas here it's like, the range is tightened. There's not much doesn't move much in either direction, but that's just your body is going to adapt. Your body's going to adapt to whatever environment you're in, regardless if you consciously are aware of the stimulus.
Yeah, so you're completely unaware of these adaptations, but to your point, we can manipulate. So we know a slightly warmer house will help, right? But we also know that we are endotherms. We create internal heat, and this is where the idea of exercise snacks comes into play, right? So yes, you have your 2 to 3, maybe 4 big weight room workouts a week, but through a day, amazing how much heat you can generate in a quick 5-minute workout, right? And it just a whole body, some squats, something. So that is something we could play with. It's just using exercise snacks throughout the day, getting up, going for a walk, doing really anything active with your muscles will help generate heat. And this is a really fascinating area of research that's I think, going to be a big one this year, is the idea of light exercise. So like we're talking doing the dishes, doing the laundry, going up and down the stairs, like going for a walk, anything even less than playing Frisbee with your friend. We're talking like household chores throughout the day. That equivalent is enough to kind of keep you generating body heat via not just your internal organs, but your muscles as well. And I think that comes into play. I think our life it's really, really good that a lot of people have committed an hour or two of a 24-hour day, 2 to 3 times a week to working out. But I think we're going to find that those downtimes when we're just in an office or on our couch watching Netflix on our laptop for hours, we just can't overcome that without constant movement that generates heat. Not to burn calories like the way people are thinking, but more to burn them as in create heat. Constantly tell your body, I'm actually warm. I don't need insulation. Thanks, but I don't need it, right? And just any way you can send that signal is beneficial, right? So the more saunas, the more heat exposure environmentally, but the more heat exposure internally, you're just constantly sending that input that like, I don't need the extra fat. I'm good.
Yeah. This gets to, there's another line of research that supports this, the non-exercise activity thermogenesis, NEAT. Mm-hmm. So people who now, unfortunately, you can't make this happen if this isn't already you, but people who fidget, like, people who their like knee is always bouncing or they're just
incredible amount of heat. Yeah.
Yeah. They just, and you look over and you're like, you're doing it again. Like what? Oh, my knee's bouncing. Like people who do it don't know that they're doing it, but something's always moving. They're fiddling with a pen, a lot with the legs. They're tapping their toes. Something's going all the time and they aren't aware that they're doing it until someone tells them, hey, by the way, you've been tapping your toes. It's getting annoying. That actually adds up over time. From the heat generation to some amount of calorie burn, but also to Brad's point, like it leads you, it's a heat generation mechanism just by the movement itself. So this goes along with Brad's like conscious choice to try to do that with workout snacks. Like try to get moving if you don't have it built into you already to move like in moments when you're not lifting weights, you're not doing anything big, but try to even do something small throughout the day. Yeah, those are all hits of heat. Yeah.
Yeah, but we're not talking about, we don't want your internal body temperature higher. It's about your body needing to defend a temperature. So you're not going to be like, lean people have a higher body temperature than obese people, which is actually quite the opposite. It's how well your body can defend, was it 37? I forget what the exact body temperature is.
Well, there's actually a tiny range, but yeah, it's
tiny range. Yeah. But it's so don't think this isn't a stick a thermometer in your mouth or your ear every day and track kind of thing. It's completely different. This is a keeping your body's ability to defend heat or using your body's need to defend that heat to create a body composition that you like, or at least help you make it easier to get to that level. So I can't stress it enough because some people, when I explain this to them, are like, yeah, but I'm checking my temperature all the time. Like, no, your temperature, like in research, we're not looking for a change in body temperature. It's what your body's doing to defend what it feels is the best temperature. And that's either gaining body fat or losing body fat as insulation. Right. So yeah. And then there are drugs. Remember clenbuterol and DHT? DNP, like their whole point of those drugs, we thought it was just increased calorie burn. But again, that an increased calorie burn doesn't matter if the flux is just higher, right? So if my calorie burn goes up by 500, but I eat 500 more calories, it doesn't matter. But those things create intense heat, right?
Yeah, there was one drug, like I think it was DMP. You kind of caught me off guard. I
Dynamite,
remember
right?
this.
Whatever was in dynamite.
Yeah, it was weird. You could take this and of course, bodybuilders got their hands on it first, and it raised your actual temperature and it hyper accelerated your metabolism until people actually cooked themselves. They literally died.
Do you remember? There's a guy we
overheating.
used to know who experimented with it, and he was like 4 dress shirts a day at work, just sweating through it. So it was definitely a effect on your body's understanding of where it should maintain your thermality, right?
Yeah. The answer there is you do not want to artificially, pharmaceutically raise your actual body temperature. That's bad. That's like a really bad idea. What we're talking about is, to Brad's point, exposing yourself to chronically to slightly higher temperatures than we're doing now to force your body to react in a way where it's like, well, this is kind of warm. We need to shed some fat here because that's an easier way to cool off.
There we go. Yeah.
That's kind of like what we're after, but you don't want to intervene and heat the body up. I mean, now you do technically measurably get warmer during workout, but that dissipates quickly.
An acceptable way to heat up.
Yes. And it's not out of your body's control, as it were, so to speak. Like it's not a pharmaceutical increase that the body has no mechanism to compensate for. Now you could do something dumb like work out really, really hard in a super, super hot room and pass out from heat stroke. Like that's not a good idea.
Not good. No. Happens every year at football combines, right? The NFL by the linemen, right?
Yes, by the bigger guys who have because their bodies
can't thermoregulate.
Isn't conditioned to thermoregulate in the heat. So you're going to heat up during a workout. That's normal, but that will dissipate quickly afterwards. It's this chronic, slightly elevated heat we're suggesting getting accustomed to subjecting yourself to that slowly leads your body to moving your metabolism towards shedding fat because it's the easiest way for it to regulate to the temperature it wants to be.
Yeah. A great sort of a segue or off topic to on topic point. If you're listening and you're a personal trainer and you're working with clients who are very overweight, understand they cannot thermoregulate like your other clients, right? They can overheat, right? And again, John and I were saying it was a huge issue in the NFL until they wised up to it. But the bigger men would have serious problems with heat stroke and heat sickness during their training camps, which are always sort of in the summer, versus their wide receivers and the leaner guys, right? And this is why. Had nothing to do with them being in shape or not in shape. It was literally the shape they were in is not predisposed to releasing heat.
Yeah, and there was a famous cat. I think his name is Christian Stringer. He's a lineman who unfortunately died in that in training camp, and they determined it was heat stroke, and it was pushing too hard. Again, these guys are elite athletes, the big ones and the small ones. But we're not talking about being an athlete or being agile or
just how much insulation you have. Yeah.
No, it's just in some cases, you just can't push a body that big in that kind of heat. It may get to the point where it cannot regulate. It just can't get there.
So, and it's a great point because, if you're thinking, does your body really change the amount of body fat? I'm like, that's a great example. If your brain is designed to help you thrive and survive in different environments, that's an obvious example that it does not want or it could perceive extra body fat as a threat in high heat. Great. Like, we're talking about someone who actually died from it, right? And we know that, and the preponderance of evidence on cold not being good for people, like the majority of heart attacks happen during winter, the majority of sicknesses happen during winter. It really is interesting that we're great, we're adaptable, but winter still sucks. It's something we've gotten a lot better at.
I'll take the most unscientific take on it. In anyone who's lived in a cold climate in the winter, you fantasize about getting somewhere warm on a beach. But
not vice versa.
Anyone who lives in a warm climate is like, man, I can't wait to go somewhere that's freezing cold. Like this is not happening. Like
we move more during summers.
Yeah,
like it's nicer out, right?
Yeah. I got this. Now this is the first thing I thought about with all of this. So we need, and I'm sure somebody listening is already thinking this. What about cold exposure and brown fat and brown adipose tissue?
Yeah, if you've been doing cold plunges for brown fat, you're going to be a little angry. And so here's how it goes. Brown fat is an excellent way to increase heat production. in people who need it. So it's an acute reaction, right? So someone who is all of a sudden exposed to cold needs that brown fat to activate, which is a special kind of fat that can produce heat. In case you don't know, we have white fat and we have little bits of brown fat over us. And that brown fat can generate heat, specifically during exposure to cold. Now, lean people have more brown fat, right? And so you might think, oh, well, then if I get more brown fat, I will be a lean person. But it's kind of the opposite. If you become a lean person, you get more brown fat because a lean person has less insulation. So a cold challenge puts that body into a oh crap mode and activates brown fat to generate heat. It does not take a lot for there to be a lot of heat production and even an increase in brown fat content in a lean person exposed to cold constantly. But it's a survival mechanism. And in fact, the more body fat you gain, the less brown fat you have, because the less brown fat you need, because those acute exposures to cold are less life-threatening. So when you watch a really lean fitness influencer on Instagram jump into a cold plunge, he or she is absolutely activating their brown fat because they're lean. But they're not lean because they activated their brown fat, right? So it's a bit misleading for anyone trying to lose weight because I don't know, John, how would you describe that? Like it's there because you're lean. It didn't get you lean.
Yeah, you always have to. It's confusing as you talk through it. You always have to take it from the standpoint that your body's defending its temperature.
Yes.
So so lean or excess body fat. In the excess body fat case, the fat itself is the insulation defending the temperature. Therefore, they don't
need to spend a lot of calories or energy, wasting energy, heating themselves up. They've got insulation.
No, it's literally insulating, like literally.
Yeah.
But if you're much leaner and you're exposed to a cold stimulus, well, you don't have the same insulation. If there was like two versions of you, like your exact body, one with 50 pounds more fat and the other one's 50 pounds less, and we exposed both versions of you, both clones, to the exact same cold challenge, the leaner version of you would have to activate brown fat to defend its temperature. It wants to keep everything in here at the same temperature. Like we know just a few degrees up or down in temperature and you're in trouble in both directions. Yeah. So your body's defending temperature all the time. But the heavier version of you that has more insulation doesn't need to activate any brown fat because it doesn't need to generate as much heat because it's not losing as much heat. The adipose tissue is keeping the heat in, which means it's defending the internal temperature. So if you just view your internal temperature as a straight line, whatever direction that would be, and then the temperature around it's going up and down. If you have more body fat, you can defend your internal temperature against that a cold exposure without having to generate more heat. But if you have way less body fat and then you're exposed to cold, one of your only adaptations, without you just getting up and running around, is brown fat can heat you up temporarily.
Yeah. And then if you eventually gain body fat, you will lose the amount of brown fat you have. So it's super. Now, if this isn't saying brown fat's useless, if you can find a way to pharmaceutically activate it in obese people, the whole other line. But for this intense specific purpose of like cold plunges, etc. If you're lean, it might help you get leaner. But if you're really overweight, it might just drive you to eat more because it only takes like 2.5 hours of mild cold exposure before your appetite jacks up. So I can only imagine, the sub-zero temperatures of the cold exposure might take 10 minutes before all of a sudden you're going to be unperceivably more hungry. And that's the trick again, right? Eating a little bit more, even though you don't know you're doing it.
Affecting the unconscious drive to eat. And then depending on if you even bother with these short moments of cold exposure, if you park it right after a workout, you could have blunted the growth hormone response from the workout.
100%, yeah. And they found that consistently reduced muscle growth, protein synthesis, GH, as testosterone as cold exposure. So it looks cool.
Yeah. So in this particular case, it seems as though if your eye is towards burning body fat, we want to pull as many levers as we can and manipulate our environment as best we can into our favor. So exercise is one of them. that some adjustment to your diet's another one.
We're going to get on that in a minute. Yeah.
Yeah. But trying to find more moments of heat generally is going to be another one that just pushes the whole equation, that stacks the deck slightly in your favor, that your body's going to want to defend its internal temperature by reducing your body fat, by moving hormones in the direction of burning more fat, by causing you to want to eat less unconsciously. You're not going to notice over time. Over time, it'll be an arrow in your quiver towards fat loss.
Great way. Yeah. Yes. Now, this becomes vitally important when you're dieting, because eating food, assimilating that food and nutrients, digesting that food, all creates heat. And some foods create more heat than other foods. It's called the thermic effect of food. Lots of research on it. It was really popular for a while, and then people kind of realized it's sort of a standard number, so there's not much you can do. But it becomes vitally important when you're eating less, because then you do have to look at the foods that create the most heat, which is protein. Read a really interesting paper suggesting people's move from a frugivore scavenger-based diet to a more predator-based diet was actually an adaptation to the cold. Not only was it the only food available during some of the harsh winters when they kind of moved into Scandinavian areas through migration, but also because those high protein diets created internal heat from the protein. And then if they were higher fat diets, because, and this is really interesting, animals are the same, right? So your animals in hot temperatures are very lean meat, but your animals up in very cold temperatures have extra layers of fat because they follow these same rules. Same with cold water, fish, etc. But that fat provided calories that then you could create your own body fat with. So if you're dieting, or at the very extreme, you're fasting, there's zero heat coming from your food. So if you're fasting, you got to stay warm, which is why a sauna during a fast feels so good. But also is why your fingers might get cold when you're fasting. So you got to throw on an extra sweater. And this is when you really have to take into account exercise snacks. Nothing makes a fast go by faster than just being active and warm throughout the day. But if you're dieting, which means eating a little bit less every day, that's where I think protein does come into play. Is it if you're going to only eat a little bit, you may as well eat the foods that are going to jack up the heat being created inside your body. And when exercise snacks still matter.
Yeah, because reducing your calories, reducing the overall total calories you're eating is going to reduce to some effect the overall thermic effect of the food, because you're just eating less total food. So if you adjust the ratio to more protein, you're recovering some of that thermic heat in less total calories.
And John, I always joke about, the linguistics of this all, right? So we've always talked about your fat burning furnace, right? We talk about trying to lose weight so you can look hot, right? You constantly use the terms heat, hot, warmth, or things like furnace to describe healthy or look good looking or losing fat, etc. And now we're saying, oh shit, it's kind of literal, right? It's not about burning calories. In burning calories, the important part's not the calories, it's the burning, it's the hot, it's the heat.
Yeah, it's the heat. Yeah. And so it kind of comes back to many things bodybuilders did in the 70s and 80s that we sort of adopted, but didn't have good research data on, but it just seemed to be best practices. Like one of them was eating meals throughout the day. Those could have been, and eating really high protein. Those could have been attempts they've somehow figured out this is probably affecting the idea of hits of heat and hits of more thermic effective food without really knowing,
they just knew it made losing weight a bit easier.
Yeah, losing weight a little bit easier. Yeah. So they were already doing a few things that sort of fit into this without really 100% knowing exactly why, because it's not like your metabolism went up, but the heat did. Yeah. So it were hits of heat all along, because they understood when you're eating less, you're going to feel colder, something feels off. But if you kept kind of grazing throughout the day, there was a heat effect, but no one could put their finger on it or point to research as to why that pattern was more helpful. All they know is it seemed to work better. So the result was there.
Here's an interesting one. Let's think of other sort of hints that this is correct. Is one of the biggest health trends in the last decade, or biggest health, headlines would be vitamin D, right? A essential vitamin that has been linked to your ability to regulate your body fat that you really only really get from sunlight, and sun is generally associated with heat, right? So I find that really fascinating that there is an adequate amount of vitamin D for a healthy human being that helps to regulate a lot of processes, including your body fat. And other than a few small food sources, your best way to get it would be exposure to bright sunlight. So for instance, me right now, when we're recording and I'm in Canada right now, I could go outside all day. I'm not getting vitamin D. But during my summers, I can get some, right? Or if I were to go on vacation and go down and visit John or go to Florida somewhere, I could synthesize vitamin D very quickly from sunlight hitting my skin. So it is just a throwback to us being tropical by nature, is that I need sunlight to produce the right amount of vitamin D to keep me healthy and thriving. Right? So, which also makes me wonder if we should just take vitamin D in the mornings and make sure, like, I bet you there's a chronology during the day to when the best time to take vitamin D is off of that thought.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, the other one is there is a direct association between how much light you see in a day, so sunlight, heat, and how much melatonin you produce at night when that light disappears. And also, the warmer it is you're exposed to during the day, and then the cooler your bedroom when you go to bed, the better you'll sleep. So we don't want your house at 22, 23 at night. We want you to do your best to mimic a tropical day-night cycle of a really warm day and a chilly night, of vitamin D during the day and melatonin at night. So that seems to be a natural cycle that we thrive in best, that we should try to our best to continue to recreate no matter where we live.
Yeah. So like, I think we're at the point where we need the take home message here. And I think you just started touching on it. We're trying to mimic, I guess, a tropical day style of temperature, warm in the day, cool at night.
Yeah. Light during the day.
Light during the day. Dark and cool at night. Obviously dark, but like, you know what? Not obviously dark.
No.
Put the screens away. Get rid of blue light earlier than earlier. Don't be having.
Turn the lights off in your house. I'm amazed how people sleep with them on. Yeah.
Yeah. Turn the lights off. Don't have screens, or make sure they go to whatever the night mode is, where it's not a blue light anymore. Like, you're trying to recreate pre-industrialized society living in a tropical climate. It's
active during the day. Not like, we're not saying, hey, you need to run 20K and do 30 sets of deadlifts every day, but we mean move around. Generate a little bit of heat, do stuff, right? So, and some of it can be intense, but the vast majority of it should be, you know what, for your health, do the dishes and put away your laundry, right? Like, get that stuff done.
Oh, there's a good caveat there. Any of these adjustments to exposing yourself to a bit more heat, again, we're talking a couple of degrees warmer in your house, to test it out and see. It's going to be uncomfortable at the beginning, but it also, if you have any pre-existing conditions where this is the sort of thing that you need to be don't just do this without talking to your physician. If you're like, wait, I was already told to stay away from the heat.
Yeah.
Again, this is person specific. None of this is medical advice. It's always person specific. But in general, if we're living kind of too cold, slightly increasing the heat and living a little bit warmer is going to lead us towards shedding fat a bit easier. And that's the general takeaway message here.
And you still have to do the work to shed the fat, right? Like, I do think if you could do this for 5-10 years, your body would naturally adapt to a leaner state. But most of us want it done in 10-12 weeks. So you're going to do this you're going to do this to make diet and exercise easier as well. Right? Like, you still have to work out. You still have to kind of watch what you eat, unless you really want to take the long game on this one. But one of the main things, John, you and I talked about is John and I's ability to help you guys acutely short-term lose weight. John can help you get stage ready if you wanted to. So what we're really focusing now is the chronic adaptation, is what can you acclimate to make it easier to stick to your diet, to stay lean, etc. And we're suggesting heat, right? Just chase it all day in various ways that you can, slowly but surely acclimating to teaching your body it doesn't need body fat in order to regulate your temperature properly.
Right. Yeah. And that's a key point. And that's the takeaway message for this particular talk about heat, is generally more heat exposure, and slightly more heat exposure in general is going to make the process of taking fat off and keeping it off easier. It's not doing it by itself. It's just making everything you're already trying going to be a bit more effective and a bit easier over time in the long run.
Yes. One last thing I want to touch on, just for everyone listening who lives in colder climates like Canada, is we got to listen to our moms. So surface area matters. Your hands, incredible surface area. Same with your ears. So if you're going outside during winters, wear gloves and put on a hat. It actually makes a massive difference, right? So if you're you have no choice but to be exposed to cold sometimes, dress for it. And that will also probably help, right?
Yeah.
Or at the very least, keep your hands warm.
All right. So wear your hat and wear your mittens.
Exactly. Or your toque if you're Canadian.
Yeah, or two. All right. So I think that's a good place to leave it for today.
Yeah.
So for Brad Pilon, I'm John Barban, and that's your Phi Life Podcast.